sitting here today. It seems unbelievable that I was so mesmerized by Donald Trump that I was willing to do things for him that I knew were absolutely wrong. For that reason, I have come here to apologize to my family, to my government, and to the American people. Accordingly, let me now tell you about Mr. Trump. I got to know him very well, working very closely with him for more than 10 years as his executive vice president and special counsel, and then as personal attorney when he became president. When I first met Mr. Trump, he was a successful entrepreneur, a real estate giant, and an icon. Being around Mr. Trump was intoxicating. When you were in his presence, you felt like you were involved in something greater than yourself, that you were somehow changing the world. I wound up touting the Trump narrative for over a decade. That was my job. Always stay on message. Always defend. It monopolized my life. At first, I worked mostly on real estate developments and other business transactions. Shortly thereafter, Mr. Trump brought me into his personal life and private dealings. Over time, I saw his true character revealed. Mr. Trump is an enigma. He is complicated, as am I. He is both good and bad, as do we all. But the bad far outweighs the good. And since taking office, he has become the worst version of himself. He is capable of behaving kindly, but he is not kind. He is capable of committing acts of generosity, but he is not generous. He is capable of being loyal, but he is fundamentally disloyal. Donald Trump is a man who ran for office to make his brand great, not to make our country great. He had no desire or intention to lead this nation, only to market himself and to build his wealth and power. Mr. Trump would often say, this campaign was going to be the greatest infomercial in political history. He never expected to win the primary. He never expected to win the general election. The campaign, for him, was always a marketing opportunity. I knew early on in my work for Mr. Trump that he would direct me to lie to further his business interests. And I am ashamed to say that when it was for a real estate mogul in the private sector, I considered it trivial. As the president, I consider it significant and dangerous. But in the mix, lying for Mr. Trump was normalized, and no one around him questioned it. In fairness, no one around him today questions it either. A lot of people have asked me about whether Mr. Trump knew about the release of the hacked documents, the Democratic National Committee email, ahead of time. And the answer is yes. As I earlier stated, Mr. Trump knew from Roger Stone in advance about the WikiLeaks drop of emails. In July of 2016, days before the Democratic convention, I was in Mr. Trump's office when his secretary announced that Roger Stone was on the phone. Mr. Trump put Mr. Stone on the speakerphone. Mr. Stone told Mr. Trump that he had just gotten off the phone with Julian Assange, and that Mr. Assange told Mr. Stone that within a couple of days, there would be a massive dump of emails that would damage Hillary Clinton's campaign. Mr. Trump responded by stating to the effect, wouldn't that be great? Mr. Trump is a racist. The country has seen Mr. Trump court white supremacists and bigots. You have heard him call poorer countries shitholes. In private, he is even worse. He once asked me if I could name a country run by a black person that wasn't a shithole. This was when Barack Obama was president of the United States. And while we were once driving through a struggling neighborhood in Chicago, he commented that only black people could live that way. And he told me that black people would never vote for him because they were too stupid. And yet, I continued to work for him. Mr. Trump is a cheat. As previously stated, I am giving to the committee today 3 years of Mr. Trump's personal financial statements from 2011, 2012, and 2013, which he gave to Deutsche Bank to inquire about a loan to buy the Buffalo Bills and to Forbes. These are Exhibits 1A, 1B, and 1C to my testimony. It was my experience that Mr. Trump inflated his total assets when it served his purposes, such as trying to be listed amongst the wealthiest people in Forbes, and deflated his assets to reduce his real estate taxes. I'm sharing with you 2 newspaper articles, side by side, that are examples of Mr. Trump inflating and deflating his assets, as I said, to suit his financial interests. These are Exhibit 2 to my testimony. As I noted, I'm giving the committee today an article he wrote on and sent to me that reported on an auction of a portrait of Mr. Trump. This is Exhibit 3A to my testimony. Mr. Trump directed me to find a straw bidder to purchase a portrait of him that was being auctioned off at an Art Hamptons event. The objective was to ensure that this portrait, which was going to be auctioned last, would go for the highest price of any portrait that afternoon. The portrait was purchased by the fake bidder for $60,000. Mr. Trump directed the Trump Foundation, which is supposed to be a charitable organization, to repay the fake bidder, despite keeping the art for himself. And please see Exhibit 3B to my testimony. And it should come as no surprise that one of my more common responsibilities was that Mr. Trump directed me to call business owners, many of whom are small businesses that were owed money for their services, and told them that no payment or a reduced payment would be coming. When I asked Mr. Trump, or when I told Mr. Trump of my success, he actually reveled in it. And yet, I continued to work for him. Mr. Trump is a con man. He asked me to pay off an adult film star with whom he had an affair and to lie about it to his wife, which I did. And lying to the First Lady is one of my biggest regrets because she is a kind, good person, and I respect her greatly, and she did not deserve that. And I'm giving the committee today a copy of the $130,000 wire transfer from me to Ms. Clifford's attorney during the closing days of the presidential campaign that was demanded by Ms. Clifford to maintain her silence about her affair with Mr. Trump. And this is Exhibit 4 to my testimony. Mr. Trump directed me to use my own personal funds from a home equity line of credit to avoid any money being traced back to him that could negatively impact his campaign. And I did that too, without bothering to consider whether that was improper, much less whether it was the right thing to do or how would it impact me, my family, or the public. And I am going to jail in part because of my decision to help Mr. Trump hide that payment from the American people before they voted a few days later. As Exhibit 5A to my testimony shows, I am providing a copy of a $35,000 check that President Trump personally signed from his personal bank account on August 1st of 2017, when he was President of the United States, pursuant to the cover-up, which was the basis of my guilty plea to reimburse me, the word used by Mr. Trump's TV lawyer for the illegal hush money I paid on his behalf. This $35,000 check was one of 11 check installments that was paid throughout the year while he was president. Other checks to reimburse me for the hush money payments were signed by Donald Trump Jr. and Alan Weisselberg. And see for that example 5B. The President of the United States thus wrote a personal check for the payment of hush money as part of a criminal scheme to violate campaign finance laws. And you can find the details of that scheme directed by Mr. Trump in the pleadings in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. So picture this scene. In February of 2017, 1 month into his presidency, I'm visiting President Trump in the Oval Office for the first time, and it's truly awe-inspiring. He's showing me all around and pointing to different paintings, and he says to me something to the effect of, "Don't worry, Michael, your January and February reimbursement checks are coming." They were FedExed from New York, and it takes a while for that to get through the White House system. As he promised, I received the first check for the reimbursement of $70,000 not long thereafter. When I say con man, I'm talking about a man who declares himself brilliant, but directed me to threaten his high school, his colleges, and the college board to never release his grades or SAT scores. As I mentioned, I'm giving the committee today copies of a letter I sent at Mr. Trump's direction threatening these schools with civil and criminal actions if Mr. Trump's grades or SAT scores were ever disclosed without his permission. And these are under Exhibit 6. The irony wasn't lost on me at the time that Mr. Trump in 2011 had strongly criticized President Obama for not releasing his grades. As you can see in Exhibit 7, Mr. Trump declared, "Let him show his records," after calling President Obama a terrible student. The sad fact is that I never heard Mr. Trump say anything in private that led me to believe he loved our nation or wanted to make it better. In fact, he did the opposite. When telling me in 2008 or 2009 that he was cutting employees' salaries in half, including mine, he showed me what he claimed was a $10 million IRS tax refund. And he said that he could not believe how stupid the government was for giving someone like him that much money back. During the campaign, Mr. Trump said that he did not consider Vietnam veteran and prisoner of war Senator John McCain to be a hero because he likes people who weren't captured. At the same time, Mr. Trump tasked me to handle the negative press surrounding his medical deferment from the Vietnam draft. Mr. Trump claimed it was because of a bone spur, but when I asked for medical records, he gave me none and said that there was no surgery. He told me not to answer the specific questions by reporters, but rather offer simply the fact that he received a medical deferment. He finished the conversation with the following comment: "You think I'm stupid? I'm not going to Vietnam." And I find it ironic, Mr. President, that you are in Vietnam right now. And yet, I continue to work for him. Questions have been raised about whether I know of direct evidence that Mr. Trump or his campaign colluded with Russia. I do not. And I want to be clear, but I have my suspicions. Sometime in the summer of 2017, I read all over the media that there had been a meeting in Trump Tower in June of 2016 involving Don Jr. and others from the campaign with Russians. including a representative of the Russian government, and an email setting up the meeting with the subject line, "Dirt on Hillary Clinton." And something clicked in my mind. I remembered being in a room with Mr. Trump, probably in early June of 2016, when something peculiar happened. Don Trump Jr. came into the room and walked behind his father's desk, which in and of itself was unusual. People didn't just walk behind Mr. Trump's desk to talk to him. And I recall Don Jr. leaning over to his father and speaking in a low voice, which I could clearly hear, and saying, "The meeting is all set." And I remember Mr. Trump saying, "Okay, good, let me know." What struck me as I looked back and thought about the exchange between Don Jr. and his father was, first, that Mr. Trump had frequently told me and others that his son Don Jr. had the worst judgment of anyone in the world, and also that Don Jr. would never set up any meeting of significance alone, and certainly not without checking with his father. I also knew that nothing went on in Trump world, especially the campaign, without Mr. Trump's knowledge and approval. So I concluded that Don Jr. was referring to that June 2016 Trump Tower meeting about dirt on Hillary with the Russian representatives when he walked behind his dad's desk that day, and that Mr. Trump knew that was the meeting Don Jr. was talking about when he said, "That's good, let me know." Over the past year or so, I have done some real soul searching, and I see now that my ambition and the intoxication of Trump power had much to do with the bad decisions, in part, that I made. And to you, Chairman Cummings and Ranking Member Jordan, the other members of this committee, the members of the House and Senate, I am sorry for my lies and for lying to Congress. And to our nation, I am sorry for actively working to hide from you the truth about Mr. Trump when you needed it most. For those who question my motives for being here today, I understand. I have lied, but I am not a liar. And I have done bad things, but I am not a bad man. I have fixed things, but I am no longer your fixer, Mr. Trump. And I am going to prison and have shattered the safety and security that I tried so hard to provide for my family. My testimony certainly does not diminish the pain that I have caused my family and my friends. Nothing can do that. And I have never asked for, nor would I accept, a pardon from President Trump. And by coming today, I have caused my family to be the target of personal, scurrilous attacks by the president and his lawyer, trying to intimidate me from appearing before this panel. Mr. Trump called me a rat for choosing to tell the truth, much like a mobster would do when one of his men decides to cooperate with the government. And as Exhibit 8 shows, I have provided the committee with copies of tweets that Mr. Trump posted, attacking me and my family. And only someone burying his head in the sand would not recognize them for what they are. It's encouragement to someone to do harm to me and my family. I never imagined that he would engage in vicious, false attacks on my family and unleash his TV lawyer to do the same. And I hope this committee and all members of Congress on both sides of the aisle make it clear that as a nation, we should not tolerate attempts to intimidate witnesses before Congress, and attacks on family are out of bounds and not acceptable. And I wish to especially thank Speaker Pelosi for her statements, it's Exhibit 9, to protect this institution and me, and the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Adam Schiff, and you, Chairman Cummings, for likewise defending the institution and my family against the attacks by Mr. Trump, and also the many Republicans who have admonished the president as well. I am not a perfect man. I have done things I am not proud of, and I will live with the consequences of my actions for the rest of my life. But today, I get to decide the example that I set for my children and how I attempt to change how history will remember me. I may not be able to change the past, but I can do right by the American people here today. And I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer the committee's questions.
Thank you very
President's
much.
former lawyer Michael Cohen speaking live on Capitol Hill. This is special coverage from NPR
Before I
News.
start, I want to make sure you really understand something. You have admitted lying to Congress, to this very body, and now you're going to prison for it. Do you, Mr. Cohen, recognize the gravity of your offenses? You are a lawyer, right?
As of yesterday, I am no longer a lawyer. I have lost my law license, amongst other things.
But you understand the gravity of this moment.
I most certainly do, Mr. Chairman.
I want you to really hear this, Mr. Cohen. We will not tolerate lying to this Congress by anybody. We're in search of the truth. You understand that?
I do.
Now, the president has also made numerous statements that turned out to be inaccurate. For example, he said he knew nothing about the hush money payments to Ms. Clifford. And his 2017 financial disclosure form said he never owed money to reimburse you for those payments. Yet, in your testimony, Mr. Cohen, you said that you met with the president in the Oval Office in February of 2017 and discussed his plans to reimburse you for money you paid. You say he told you, and I quote, "Don't worry, Michael, your January and February reimbursement checks are coming." Is that accurate? And was that in the Oval Office?
The statement is accurate, but the discussions regarding the reimbursement occurred long before he became president.
Would you explain that?
Back in 2017, when, actually I apologize, in 2016, prior to the election, I was contacted by Keith Davidson, who is the attorney, or was the attorney for Ms. Clifford, for Stormy Daniels. And after several rounds of conversations with him about purchasing her life rights for $130,000, what I did each and every time is go straight into Mr. Trump's office and discuss the issue with him. When it was ultimately determined, and this was days before the election, that Mr. Trump was going to pay the $130,000. In the office with me was Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization. He acknowledged to Alan that he was going to pay the $130,000 and that Alan and I should go back to his office and figure out how to do it. So yes, sir, I stand by the statement that I gave, but there was a history to it.
In your testimony, you said you bought some checks. Is that right? You said you bought some checks.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you about one of these. This from the Trump Trust that holds the president businesses. Can you tell me who signed this check?
I believe that the top signature is Donald Trump Jr. And the bottom signature, I believe, is Alan Weisselberg's.
And can you tell me the date of that check?
March 17th of 2017.
Now, wait a minute. Hold up. The date on the check is after President Trump held his big press conference claiming that he gave up control of his businesses. How could the president have arranged for you to get this check if he was supposedly playing no role in his business?
Because the payments were designed to be paid over the course of 12 months, and it was declared to be a retainer for services that would be provided for the year of 2017.
Was there a retainer agreement?
There is no retainer agreement.
Would Don Jr. or Mr. Weisselberg have more information about that?
Mr. Weisselberg, for sure, about the entire discussions and negotiations prior to the election, and Don Jr. would have cursory information.
Now, here's another one. This one appears to be signed by Donald Trump himself. Is that his signature?
That is Donald Trump's signature.
So let me make sure I understand. Donald Trump wrote you a check out of his personal account while he was serving as President of the United States of America to reimburse you for hush money payments to Ms. Clifford. Is that what you are telling the American people today?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
One final question. The president claimed he knew nothing about these payments. His ethics filing said he owed nothing to you. Based on your conversations with him, is there any doubt in your mind that President Trump knew exactly what he was paying for?
There is no doubt in my mind, and I truly believe there is no doubt in the mind of the people of the United States of America.
And these new documents appear to corroborate what you just told us. With that, I'll yield to...
That was the chairman, Elijah
I will make
Cummings.
sure
This
that
is
you and I
Jim
meet
Jordan,
one day
Republican
while we're in
ranking member of the
courthouse,
committee.
And I will take you for every penny you still don't have, and I will come after your Daily Beast and everybody else that you possibly know. So I'm warning you. Tread very effing lightly, because what I'm going to do to you is going to be effing disgusting. You understand me? Mr. Cohen, who said that?
I did.
And did you say that, Mr. Cohen, in your testimony on page 2, you said you did things for Mr. Trump in an effort to protect him. Was that statement that I just read that you admitted to saying, did you do that to protect Donald Trump?
I did it to protect Mr. Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka Trump, and Eric Trump.
And in your sentencing statement back in December in front of the judge, you said this, Mr. Cohen, my weakness can be characterized as a blind loyalty to Donald Trump, a blind loyalty that led me to choose a path of darkness. Is that accurate, Mr. Cohen?
I wrote that.
You wrote that and said that in front of the judge. Is that right?
That's correct.
Let me read a few other things here, and let me ask you why you did some of these things. When you filed a false tax return in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, and 2016, was all that out of blind loyalty to the president?
No, it was not.
When you failed to report $4 million in income to the Internal Revenue Service, did you do that to protect Donald Trump?
No, I did not.
And when you failed to pay $1.4 million in taxes, I got constituents who don't make that in a lifetime. When you failed to pay $1.4 million in taxes to the U.S. Treasury, was that out of some blind loyalty to the President of the United States?
It was not, but the number was 1.38 and change, and I have paid that money back to the IRS at this time.
I think the American people will appreciate that 1.3.
And I would also just like to say it was over a course of 5 years, approximately $260,000 a year.
Yeah, and that's what I said, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, that's 5 years.
Yes.
Got it. When you made false statements to financial institutions concerning a home equity line of credit, taxi medallions, and your Park Avenue apartment in 2013, 2014, and 2015, and you pled guilty to making those false statements to those banks, was that all done to protect the president?
No, it was not.
How about this one? When you created the fake Twitter account, Women for Cohen, and paid a firm to post tweets like this one. In a world of lies, deception, and fraud, we appreciate this honest guy at Michael Cohen, hashtag TGIF, hashtag handsome, hashtag sexy. Was that done to protect the president?
Mr. Jordan, I didn't actually set that up. It was done by a young lady that worked for Red Finch. And during the course of the campaign, which you would know gets somewhat crazy and wild, we were having fun. That's what it was, sir. We were having fun.
Was it done to protect the president?
That was not done to protect the
Was it
president.
a fake Twitter account?
No, that was a real Twitter account. It exists.
Pay a firm to create this
I didn't
account
pay the firm
for
to do
Cohen.
that. It was done by a young lady that works for the firm. And again, sir, we were having fun during a stressful time.
The point is, Mr. Cohen, did you lie to protect the president or did you lie to help yourself?
I'm not sure how that helped me, sir.
I'm not sure how it did either.
Right. And I would
point
like
is,
to
I
also
think-
note that more than half the people
And
on
here's
that
the
site
point.
are men.
Here's the point. The chairman just gave you a 30-minute opening statement, and you have a history of lying over and over and over again, and frankly, you don't take my word for it. Take what the court said. Take what the Southern District of New York said. Cohen did crimes that were marked by a pattern of deception and that permeated his professional life. These crimes were distinct in their harms, but bear a common set of circumstances. They each involved deception and were each motivated by personal greed and ambition. A pattern of deception for personal greed and ambition, and you just got 30 minutes of an opening statement where you trashed the President of the United States of America. Mr. Cohen, how long did you work for Donald Trump?
Approximately a decade.
10 years?
That's correct.
You said all these bad things about the president there in that last 30 minutes, and yet you worked for him for 10 years? All those bad things, I mean, if it's that bad, I can see you working for him for 10 days, maybe 10 weeks, maybe even 10 months. But you worked for him for 10 years. Mr. Cohen, how long did you work in the White House?
I never worked in the White House.
That's the point, isn't it, Mr. Cohen?
No, sir.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not, sir.
You wanted to work in the White House.
No, sir.
You didn't get brought to the dance.
Sir.
And now,
I was extremely proud to be personal attorney to the President of the United States of America. I did not want to go to the White House. I was offered jobs. I can tell you a story of Mr. Trump reaming out Reince Priebus because I had not taken a job where Mr. Trump wanted me to, which is working with Don McGahn at the White House General Counsel's
Mr. Cohen,
office.
you work for the
Sir,
president.
Sir, one second. All right. What I said at the time, and I brought a lawyer in who produced a memo as to why I should not go in because there would be no attorney-client privilege. And in order to handle
Mr.
some
Cohen?
of the matters that I talked about in my opening, that it would be best suited for me not to go in, and that every president had a personal
Cohen, here's
attorney.
what I see. Here's what I see. I see a guy who worked for 10 years and is here trashing the guy he worked for 10 years, didn't get a job in the White House, and now you're behaving just like everyone else who's got fired or didn't get the job they wanted, like Andy McCabe, like James Comey, same kind of selfish motivation after you don't get the thing you want. That's what I see here today, and I think that's what the American people.
Mr. Jordan, all I wanted was what I got, to be personal attorney to the president, to enjoy the senior year of my son in high school and waiting for my daughter who's graduating from college to come back to New York. I got exactly what I want,
Gentlemen, stop.
Exactly what you want.
what I
You want
wanted.
a prison
That's
in-
right.
Gentlemen,
I received exactly what I wanted.
Gentlemen, time has expired. Ms. Washington Schultz.
This is Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Democrat on the committee, questioning Michael Cohen, the president's former
Cohen,
lawyer.
Thank you for being here today. As you likely know, I served as the chair of the Democratic National Committee at the time of the Russian hacks and when Russia weaponized the messages that it had stolen. But I want to be clear. My questions are not about the harm done to any individual by WikiLeaks and the Russians. It's about the possible and likely harm to the United States of America and our democracy. I have a series of questions that I hope will connect more of these dots. Mr. Cohen, is it your testimony that Mr. Trump had advanced knowledge of the Russia WikiLeaks release of the DNC's emails?
I cannot answer that in a yes or no. He had advanced notice that there was going to be a dump of emails, but at no time did I hear the specificity of what those emails were going to be.
But you do testify today that he had advanced knowledge of their imminent release,
That is what I had stated in my testimony.
and that he cheered that outcome.
Yes, ma'am.
Did Mr. Trump likely share this information with his daughter Ivanka, son Don Jr., or Jared Kushner?
I'm not aware of that.
Was Ivanka, Jared, or Don Jr. still involved in the Russian tower deal at that time?
The company was involved in the deal, which meant that the family was involved in the deal.
If Mr. Trump and his daughter Ivanka and son Donald Jr. are involved in the Russian Trump tower deal, is it possible the whole family is conflicted or compromised with a foreign adversary in the months before the election?
Yes.
Based on your experience with the president and knowledge of his relationship with Mr. Stone, do you have reason to believe that the president explicitly or implicitly authorized Mr. Stone to make contact with WikiLeaks and to indicate the campaign's interest in the strategic release of these illegally hacked materials?
I'm not aware of that.
Was Mr. Stone a free agent reporting back to the president what he had done? Or was he an agent of the campaign acting on behalf of the president and with his apparent authority?
No, he was a free agent.
A free agent that was reporting back to the president what he had done.
Correct. He frequently reached out to Mr. Trump, and Mr. Trump was very happy to take his calls. It was free service.
Roger Stone says he never spoke with Mr. Trump about WikiLeaks. How can we corroborate what you are saying?
I don't know, but I suspect that the special counsel's office and other government agencies have the information that you're seeking.
Moving on to a little later in 2016, a major WikiLeaks dump happens hours after the Access Hollywood tape is released. Do you believe or are you aware of Mr. Trump coordinating or signaling for this email dump?
I am unaware of that. I actually was not even in the country at the time of the Billy Bush tape. I was in London visiting my daughter.
Knowing how Mr. Trump operates with his winning at all costs mentality, do you believe that he would cooperate or collude with a foreign power to win the presidency? Is he capable of that?
It calls on so much speculation, ma'am. It would be unfair for me to
I understand,
give
but
an
you
answer
have
for
a
that.
tremendous amount of experience. Even when
Mr.
you
Trump
testified today.
is all about winning, and
And
he
in
will
your-
do what is
And
necessary
in
within
your
which to win.
opinion and experience, would he have the potential to cooperate or collude with a foreign power to win the presidency at all costs?
Yes.
Based on what you know, would Mr. Trump, or did he, lie about colluding and coordinating with the Russians at any point during the campaign?
So as I stated in my testimony, I wouldn't use the word colluding. Was there something odd about the back and forth praise with President Putin? Yes, but I'm not really sure that I can answer that question in terms of collusion. I was not part of the campaign. I don't know the other conversations that Mr. Trump had with other individuals. There's just so many dots that all seem to lead to the same
And
direction.
finally, before my time expires, Mr. Cohen, the campaign and the entire Trump organization appeared to be filthy with Russian contact. There are Russian business contacts. There are campaign Russian contacts. There are lies about all of those contacts. And then we have Roger Stone informing the president just before the Democratic National Convention that that WikiLeaks was going to drop documents in the public arena that we knew at that point were hacked and stolen by Russia from the Democratic National Committee.
The gentle lady's time has expired. You may answer her inquiry.
My question is,
Quickly.
given all those connections, is it likely that Donald Trump was fully aware and had every intent of working with Russia to help make sure that he could win the presidency at all costs.
So let me say that this is a matter that's currently being handled by the House Select and the Senate Select Intelligence Committees. And so I would rather not answer that specific question other than just to tell you that Mr. Trump's desire to win would have him work with anyone. And one other thing that I had said in my statement is that when it came to the Trump Tower Moscow project, it was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and we never expected to win the election. So this was just business as usual.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen.
Great of Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This is special
Thank you, Mr.
coverage from
Chairman.
NPR News,
Ranking
live
Member
coverage
Gordon.
of Michael Cohen.
Chairman in this committee have
Testimony
promised
before
members of the
Congress.
American people a fair and open process. Yet the Democrats have vastly limited the scope of this hearing. They've issued a gag order to try to tell members of this committee what we can and cannot talk about. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle claim that they want the truth, that they want transparency and fair oversight. Yet the Democrats' witness to testify before Congress today is none other than a scorned man who's going to prison for lying to Congress. Let that sink in. He's going to prison for lying to Congress, and he's the star witness to Congress. If you read the sentencing report on Mr. Cohen, words like deceptive and greedy are scattered throughout that report. It paints a picture of a narcissist, a bully, who cannot tell the truth, whether it's about the president or about his own personal life. But today, he's the majority party's star witness.
This is Mark Green from Tennessee, a
If the
Republican.
Democrats were after the truth, they'd have an honest person here testifying. And if they were really after the truth, they'd not restrict the questioning to just a few topics. But let's take a look at those restricted topics. Mr. Chairman, the first topic in your limited scope that I can ask Mr. Cohen is about the president's debts. But, Mr. Chairman, didn't Mr. Cohen plead guilty to lying to banks about his personal finances? So we're asking a guy going to jail for lying about his debts to comment about the president's debts. He's the expert. Mr. Chairman, your next couple of topics say that I can ask Mr. Cohen about the president's compliance with financial disclosures and campaign finance laws, but didn't Mr. Cohen on 2 occasions break campaign finance law with his own donations? So again, the majority party's star witness on the president's compliance is a guy who broke compliance laws himself. Mr. Chairman, you graciously allow us to ask questions of Mr. Cohen on the president's dealings with the IRS and tax law. Your star witness here broke the law with regards to the IRS at least 5 times. He pled guilty on cheating on his taxes, lying to the IRS. He's the best witness you got? Next up, with the permission of the chairman, I get to ask Mr. Cohen about his perspective on the president's business dealings. Let me get this straight. The witness lied to multiple financial institutions to get loans to pay off other loans just to keep himself afloat, and he's going to be the expert on business practices. Obviously, Mr. Chairman, the witness may produce documents that he suggests incriminates the president, yet he lies to banks. All of those lies were done on fraudulent documents. Documents that he forged. Nothing he says or produces has any credibility. Apparently, he even lied about delivering his own child, which his wife had to correct the record. Ladies and gentlemen, how on earth is this witness credible? With all the lies and deception, the self-serving fraud, it begs the question, what is the majority party doing here? No one can see this guy as credible. He will say whatever he wants to accomplish his own personal goals. He's a fake witness, and his presence here is a travesty. I hope the American people see through this. I know the people back in Tennessee will. And with that statement, sir, I have a few questions of the witness. With your loss of your law license, I think you mentioned in your opening statement that you had been disbarred. What is your source of income in the future?
I don't expect I'm going to have a source of income when I'm in federal penitentiary.
What Is there a book deal coming or anything like that?
I have no book deal right now in the process. I have been contacted by many, including for television, the movie. If you want to tell me who you would like to play you, I'm more than happy to write the name down.
I'm sure
But I
there's a
will
very
also like to
attractive
turn
man.
around and just to correct your statement on me. No
Well, let me ask
individual-
one other question, though. I only have a limited amount of time.
No individual-
One quick question. Who paid your expenses to be here today?
Who's paid my expenses?
To be here today?
I paid my expenses.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the remaining of my time to the ranking member.
Mr. Cohen, how many times you talked to the special counsel's office?
7.
Did they talk to you at all in preparation for today's hearing between the 7 times you talked to him prior to your sentencing? Have you had any conversations with the special counsel's office between sentencing and today?
I'm sorry, sir, I don't understand your question.
You talked to him 7 times. That's in the sentencing memorandums that were in front of the court back in December. What I'm asking is how many times have you talked to the special counsel's office since then up to today's appearance here in Congress?
The gentleman's time has expired. You may answer the question now. That one question.
I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that.
Mr. Maloney.
Well, I'll come back to that.
It's Carolyn Maloney,
Mr. Chairman.
Democrat of New York, questioning Michael Cohen.
In your 10 years of working for Donald Trump, did he control everything that went on in the Trump organization? And did you have to get his permission in advance and report back after every meeting of any importance?
Yes. There was nothing that happened at the Trump organization, from whether it was a response as the Daily Beast story that you referred to, Ranking Member, that did not go through Mr. Trump with his approval and sign off, as in the case of the payments.
How many times did the President, Michael, ask you or direct you to try to reach settlements with women in 2015 and 2016?
Yeah, I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't have the answer to that. I'd have to go back and try to recollect. It's certainly the 2 that we know about.
And why do you think the President did not provide the accurate information in his 2017 financial disclosure form? What was he trying to hide? He corrected other forms, but he didn't correct this one.
The payments on the reimbursement of the funds that I extended on his behalf.
Can you elaborate more?
Well, going back into the story, as I stated, when Alan Weisselberg and I left the office and we went to his office in order to make the determination on how the money was going to be wired to the IOLA, the interest on a lawyer's account for Keith Davidson in California, I had asked Alan to use his money. Didn't want to use mine, and he said he couldn't, and we then decided how else we can do it. He asked me whether or not I know anybody who wants to have a party at one of his clubs that could pay me instead, or somebody who may have wanted to become a member of one of the golf clubs. And I also don't have anybody that was interested in that. And it got to the point where it was down to the wire. It was either somebody wire the funds and purchase the life rights to the story from Miss Clifford, or it was going to end up being sold to television, and that would have embarrassed the president and it would have interfered with the election.
But the President has never amended his 2017 form to this day, and while you're facing the consequences of going to jail, he is not.
Well, I believe that they amended a financial disclosure form, and there's a footnote somewhere buried. I don't recall specifically what it says, but there is a footnote buried somewhere.
Can you describe, Michael, to the American people, catch and kill?
So catch and kill is a method that exists when you're working with a news outlet. In this specific case, it was AMI, National Enquirer, David Pecker, Dylan Howard, and others, where they would contact me or Mr. Trump or someone and state that there's a story that's percolating out there that you may be interested in. And then what you do is you contact that individual and you purchase the rights to that story from them.
And you practice this for the president?
I was involved in several of these catch and kill episodes, but these catch and kill scenarios existed between David Pecker and Mr. Trump long before I started working for him in 2007.
Michael, can you suggest who else this committee should talk to for additional information on this or anything else?
Yes, I believe David Pecker, Dylan Howard, Barry Levine of AMI as well, Alan Weisselberg, Alan Garten, the Trump Organization as well.
Well, thank you very much for your testimony, and Mr. Chairman, this is a story of redemption.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Comer.
You're listening to live special
In your
coverage from
testimony,
NPR
you
News of
stated
Michael
that you
Cohen
can
testifying
work for the
before
Trump
Congress.
organization as a lawyer dealing with real estate transactions. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Prior to coming to Congress, I've served as a director of 2 different banks, so I've seen hundreds of loan applications. And to try to determine your credibility here today, I just wanted to ask you a couple of real estate transaction questions just to see how, in fact, you operate. According to the Southern District of New York prosecutors, you lied to banks to secure loans by falsely stating the amount of debt you were carrying.
This is Republican
Cohen,
James
my
Comer of
question to you,
Kentucky.
Was it Donald Trump's fault that you knowingly committed a crime of deception to defraud a bank?
No, it's not.
Was that fraudulent loan you obtained for the Trump Organization or for you personally?
It would be for me, though I'm not familiar with which loan that you're referring to.
Mr.
I would
Cohen,
like to say one thing,
Mr.
sir.
Cohen,
Sir, I would like just to respond. When
The
we're
loan that you
talking
pled
about-
guilty-
When we're talking about the home equity line of credit, which is what I believe you're referring to,
we're also I'm going to ask a question pertaining to your
individual-
summer home that you purchased
I
too.
never purchased a summer home. No individual or no bank in the 22 years that I've had loans have ever lost a dollar with me. I owe no money to any bank.
Well, the banks usually find out if someone's trying to deceive them.
In
Did
22
your
years, I have
so-called
no
blind
money
loyalty,
that's ever been owed
Mr.
to
Cohen,
any
Mr.
individual or
Chairman.
any bank.
Mr. Cohen, did your so-called blind loyalty to the president cause you to defraud the bank for your own personal gain?
Sir, I take exception to that because there has never been a fraud on I never defrauded any bank.
Well, let's dig a little deeper on that, on the bank fraud. According to the Southern District of New York, you failed to disclose more than $20 million in liabilities, as well as tens of thousands of dollars of monthly expenses. That's according to the Southern District of New York. Now, Mr. Cohen, you being a lawyer, surely you knew you were breaking the law. No, why would you have done that?
Sir, I'm not a CPA, and I pled guilty. I'm going to prison as a result of
Because
it.
you're a con?
No, sir. Because I pled guilty, and I am going to be doing the time. I have caused tremendous pain to my family, and I take
Let's
no
go back to
happiness
the
in
one
the
last question
statements.
about the bank. When the bank found out about the liabilities that you failed to disclose, you lied again to the bank. This is according to the Southern District of New York, and said it had been expunged when in fact you just shifted the debt to another bank. So apparently, according to the information that we received, your intent to defraud the bank was for the desire to purchase the summer home for $8.5 million?
No, sir.
That's
That
not
would have
correct?
been off of an equity line, considering I had less than a 50% loan to value on the assets, and there was a pre-existing line of credit that existed years before the date that you're referring to, where this is all surrounding New York City taxi medallions.
But you understand that when you fail to disclose liabilities, especially $20 million in liabilities, that is, in fact, fraud.
Except even with the $20 million in liability,
How much was it?
the medallions were at that time worth over $45 million.
Mr. Cohen, you called Donald Trump a cheat in your opening testimony. What would you call yourself?
A fool.
You calling... Okay, well, no comment on that.
I appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, we said we were in search of the truth. I don't believe that Michael Cohen is capable of telling the truth. And I would hope that as this committee moves forward, that when we have the opportunity to subpoena witnesses, we subpoena witnesses that are not recently disbarred, are not convicted felon, and witnesses that haven't committed bank fraud and tax fraud. That is how we're going to determine the truth. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of my time to the ranking member.
I think the gentleman for you. I would just make one point. We just had a 5-minute debate where Mr. Cohen disputes what the Southern District of New York found, what the judge found, that he was actually guilty of committing bank fraud. If this statement back here doesn't say it all, Cohen's consciousness of wrongdoing is fleeting, his remorse is minimal, his instinct is to blame others is strong.
This
There's
is the
only
ranking
one
member,
wrong with
Jim
that
Jordan, Republican.
statement. His remorse is non-existent. He just debated a member of Congress saying, I really didn't do anything wrong with the false bank things that I'm guilty of and going to prison for.
Mr. Jordan,
That
that's not
underscores
what
why
I
this is
said,
wrong.
and you know that that's not what I said.
Exactly what Will the
I
gentleman
said
yield?
I pled guilty, and I take responsibility for my actions. Shame on you, Mr. Jordan.
Mr.
That's
Chair,
not what I said. Shame on you.
Mr. Chairman,
That's not what I said. What I said is I took responsibility, and I take responsibility. What I was doing is explaining to the gentleman that his facts are inaccurate. I take responsibility for my mistakes. All right? I am remorseful, and I am going to prison. I will be away from my wife and family for years. So before you turn around
We all
and you
feel
cast
bad.
more
I
dispersion,
understand that.
please understand, there are people watching you today that know me a whole lot, but I made mistakes. I own them, and I didn't fight with the Southern District of New York. I didn't put the system through an entire scenario. But what I did do is I pled guilty, all right, and I am going to be, again, going to prison.
Ms. Norton.
Michael Cohen saying shame on you to the ranking member of the committee, Jim
At the
Jordan.
center
This is
of,
Eleanor Holmes Norton, the delegate from Washington,
reasons you're
D.C.,
going
Democrat.
to prison, is conviction for campaign finance violations. And they center around some salacious revelations. The Washington Post reported or aired a Access Hollywood video. It set a record for the number of people who watched, crashed the newspaper's server. But this happened in early October, on the cusp of the election. What was Mr. Trump's reaction to the video becoming public at that time, and was he concerned about the impact of that video on the election?
The answer is yes. As I stated before, I was in London at the time visiting my daughter who was studying there for a Washington semester abroad. And I received a phone call during the dinner from Hope Hicks stating that she had just spoken to Mr. Trump, and we need you to start making phone calls to the various different news outlets that you have relationships with. And we need to spin this. And what we want to do is just to claim that this was men locker room talk.
Was the concern about the election in particular?
The answer is yes. Then couple that with Karen McDougal, which then came out around the same time, and then on top of that, the Stormy Daniels matter.
Yeah, and these things happened in the month before the election and almost one after the other. The Stormy Daniels revelation, where prosecutors and officials, prosecutors learned of that matter, and prosecutors stated that the officials at the magazine contacted you about the story, and the magazine, of course, is the National Enquiry. Is that correct, that they did
Yes, ma'am.
come to you? Were you concerned about this news story becoming public right after the Access Hollywood study in terms of impact on the election?
I was concerned about it, but more importantly, Mr. Trump was
That
concerned
was
about
my
it.
next question. What was the president's concern about these matters becoming public in October as we were about to go into an election?
I don't think anybody would dispute this belief that after the wildfire that encompassed the Billy Bush tape, that a second follow-up to it would have been pleasant. And he was concerned with the effect that it had had on the campaign, on how women were seeing him, and ultimately whether or not he would have a shot in the general election.
And so you negotiated the $130,000 payment.
The $130,000 number was not a number that was actually negotiated. It was told to me by Keith Davidson that this is a number that Ms. Clifford wanted.
Well, you finally completed that deal, as it were, on October the
28th.
Days before the election. What happened in the interim?
Contemplated whether or not to do it. Wasn't sure if she was really going to go public. There was, again, some communications back and forth between myself and Keith Davidson. And ultimately, it came to either do it or don't. At which time, again, I had gone into Mr. Trump's office, as I did after each and every conversation. And he had told me that he had spoken to a couple of friends, and it's $130,000. It's not a lot of money, and we should just do it. So go ahead and do it. And I was at the time with Alan Weisselberg, where he directed us to go back to Mr. Weisselberg's office and figure this all out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
To special
Meadows.
coverage from NPR News.
Mr. Cohen,
Now,
do you
Mark
know
Meadows, Republican
Lynn
on the
Patton?
committee, questioning
I'm
Michael
right
Cohen.
here.
Yes, sir.
Do you know Lynn Patton?
Yes, I do.
I asked Lynn to come today in her personal capacity to actually shed some light. How long have you known Ms. Patton?
I'm responsible for Lynn Patton joining the Trump Organization and the job that she currently holds.
Well, I'm glad you acknowledged that, because you made some very demeaning comments about the president that Ms. Patton doesn't agree with. In fact, it has to do with your claim of racism. She says that as a daughter of a man born in Birmingham, Alabama, that there is no way that she would work for an individual who was racist. How do you reconcile the two of those, Mr.
As neither should I, as the son of a Holocaust survivor.
But, Mr. Cohen, I guess what I'm saying is I've talked to the president over 300 times. I've not heard one time a racist comment out of his mouth in private. So how do you reconcile it? Do you have proof of those conversations?
I would ask you to
Do you have
ask...
tape recordings of those conversations?
No, sir.
Well, you've taped everybody else. Why wouldn't you have a tape?
That's also not true, sir. That's not true.
You haven't taped anybody?
I have taped individuals.
How many times have you taped individuals?
Maybe 100 times over 10 years.
Is that a low estimate? Because I've heard it's over 200 times.
No, I don't think. I think it's approximately about 100 from what I recall. But I would ask
So
you,
why
if
would
you ask me a
but if
question,
you-
sir.
Do you have
so
proof? Do you have proof?
I
Yes or
do.
no?
I do.
Oh, where's the proof?
Ask Ms. Patton how many people who are black are executives at the
Mi-
Trump Organization, and
Mr.
the answer
Cohen,
is
Mr.
zero.
Cohen, we can go through this.
What?
Here, I would
You asked me-
ask unanimous consent that her entire statement be put in the record.
Without objection.
All right, let me go on a little bit further. Did you collect $1.2 million or so from Novartis
I did.
for access to the Trump administration?
No, sir.
Why did you collect it?
Because they came to me based upon my knowledge of the enigma, Donald Trump, what he thinks.
So they
how he
paid you-
thinks- Sir, please let me finish.
No, did they pay you $1.2
We've already
million
said that,
to
yes.
give them advice?
Yes, they did. A multi-billion-dollar conglomerate came to me looking for information, not something that's unusual here in D.C., looking for information, and they believed that I had a value.
So how many
And that the
times did you meet
value
with them?
was the insight that I was capable of offering them.
How many
and they
times-
were willing to pay.
How many times did you meet with them? For $1.2 million, how many times did you meet with them?
I provided them with both in-person as well as telephone access whenever they needed.
How many times? Yes, sir. That's a question, Mr. Cohen.
I don't recall, sir.
So did you ever talk to them?
I spoke to them on several occasions, yes.
How many?
6 times.
6 times. Wow. $200,000 a call.
Sir, I also would like to,
All right,
I also
hold on.
would like to bring
This
to
is
your
my
attention
5 minutes,
the
Mr.
contract.
Cohen, not yours. Did you get money from the Bank of Kazakhstan?
It's not a Bank of Kazakhstan. It's called BTA.
BTA Bank, Kazakhstan BTA Bank. Did you get money from them?
I did.
For what purpose?
The purpose was because the former CEO of that bank had absconded with over, it was between $4 to $6 billion, and some of the money was here in the United States, and they sought my assistance in terms of finding, locating that money, and helping them to recollect it.
So are you saying that all the reports that you were paid, in some estimates over $4 million, to have access and understanding of the Trump administration, you're saying that all of that was just paid to you just because you're a nice guy?
Well, I am a nice guy, but more importantly,
Well,
each
I
and
would
every-
beg to differ.
each and
The
every
record
contract-
reflects that you're not a nice
Sir,
guy.
each and every contract contained the clause in my contracts that said, I will not lobby and I do not do government relations work. In fact, Novartis sent me their contract, which stated specifically that they wanted me to lobby, that they wanted me to provide access to government, including the president. That information, that paragraph was crossed out by me, initialed, and written in my own handwriting. Says, I will not lobby or do government relations work.
So Novartis representatives say that it was like they were hiring a non-registered lobbyist. So you disagree with that?
I don't know what they said, sir, but the contract speaks
Have you
for
ever
itself.
contacted anybody in the administration
Yes.
to advocate on behalf of any aspect of any of your contracts? I ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent.
The gentleman's time has expired. You may answer the question.
I don't know what you're referring to, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Clay.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Each of the members gets 5
Cohen,
minutes.
please
This is special coverage from NPR News, live from Capitol Hill.
In my view, we are all here for just one reason, and that's the American people are tired of being lied to. They have been lied to by President Trump. They've been lied to by the president's children. They have been lied to by the president's legal representatives.
This is Democrat Lacey Clay of Missouri.
That they have been even lied to by his congressional enablers who are still devoted to perpetuating and protecting this giant con game on the American people. Now, Mr. Cohen, I'd like to talk to you about the president's assets. Since by law, these must be reported accurately on his federal financial disclosure and when he submits them for a bank loan. Mr. Cohen, you served for nearly a decade as then businessman Trump's personal attorney and so-called fixer. Did you also have an understanding of the president's assets and how he valued those items?
Yes.
In November of 2017, Crane's New York Business reported that the Trump organization provided, quote, flagrantly untrue revenue figures going back to at least 2010 to influence Crane's ranking of the largest private companies in New York. According to the reports, while the Trump organization reported nearly $9.5 billion in revenues in 2016, public filings suggested revenues were actually less than 1/10 of that. To your knowledge, did the president or his company ever inflate assets or revenues?
Yes.
And was that done with the president's knowledge or direction?
Everything was done with the knowledge and at the direction of Mr. Trump.
Well, tell us why he would do that and what purpose did it serve?
It depends upon the situation. There were times that I was asked, again with Alan Weisselberg, the CFO, to go back and to speak with an individual from Forbes, because Mr. Trump wanted each year to have his net worth rise on the Forbes wealthiest individuals list. And so what you do is you look at the assets and you try to find an asset that has, say, for example, 40 Wall Street, which is about 1.2 million square feet. Find an asset that is comparable, find the highest price per square foot that's achieved in the area, and apply it to that building. Or if you're going off of your rent roll, you can go by the gross rent roll times a multiple, and you make up the multiple, which is something that he had talked about. It's based upon what he wanted to value the asset at.
You know, you have provided this committee with copies of the president's financial statements or parts of them from 2011, 2012, and 13. And Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit those for the record. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit the statements to the record.
Without objection to order.
Thank you. Can you explain why you had these financial statements and what you used them for?
So these financial statements were used by me for two purposes. One was discussing with media, whether it was Forbes or other magazines, to demonstrate Mr. Trump's significant net worth. That was one function. Another was when we were dealing later on with insurance companies, we would provide them with these copies so that they would understand that the premium, which is based sometimes upon the individual's capabilities to pay, would be reduced.
And all of this was done at the president's direction and with his knowledge?
Yes, because whatever the numbers would come back to be, we would immediately report it back.